The revolution of the proletariat, the working class taking over, was supposed to happen because of that vicious circle, feedback loop, death spiral thing of cost cutting and unemployment. At that point, we were supposed to get a communist economy and a communist society under the rule of the proletariat. Eventually, under the rule of nobody was the goal. It's going to be kind of a blissful anarchy. But there was no Marxist revolution during this time period. The question was why there wasn't. Lots of the things looked right for a revolution, but it hadn't happened. Vladimir Lenin, who was a Russian follower of Marx, had an answer for this. And Lenin's the guy right here. He said that imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism, which I know for us, right, sounds like capitalism perfected at its highest stage. That's not what he meant, right? It was kind of like the last dying breath of capitalism. And imperialism kept capitalism going because it allowed them to conquer new colonies. New colonies were useful in two ways. One, they were your source of raw materials. If we think back to that British propaganda poster, empire products for Britain, British manufactured goods for the empire. That's the second half, right? We get raw materials from the empire, and then we sell the empire back our manufactured goods. Yep, as soon as Jerry's back. As long as they can do that, they can hold off the revolution because new sources of raw materials help keep costs down, and having a market of people that buy your stuff gives you new consumers, even if at home you've run out. So, as I said, kind of weirdly, for Marxists, capitalism causes globalization 1.0, not because of capitalism itself, but because of capitalism's failures, right? Its flaws. If you're wondering, there has still been no truly Marxist revolution in the history of the world. Marxist revolutions are supposed to happen in fairly advanced, heavily industrialized country with a large urban working class. That's never where those things have happened. Moving past Marxism, we get to our third motivation under the gold category, or economic reasons. And this is where Smith and Ricardo come back. Right? Their ideas had not been ignored by everybody. Right? Free trade did help promote globalization. Really, of all the parts of Globalization 1.0 that have kind of lasted, free trade is the one. And mercantilism is mostly dead, although China really seems to be bringing it back, and the United States is kind of creeping in that direction lately. But otherwise, free trade continues to dominate. And of course, real imperialism is dead. I don't want you to forget, though, mercantilism is still part of this mix, and it was pretty strong in Britain and the US. But despite that, the United Kingdom and the United States still did a lot to promote free trade. The example of this is what was called the open door policy. You should learn about that next year in US history. And the idea here was to make sure that all countries could trade with China. That's represented by this political cartoon. The dogs keeping the door to the China trade open. There's Uncle Sam, the British bulldog. And then, because racism can really never find its way out of these political cartoons, Japan is the much smaller dog that is also helping to keep China open. And more generally, the Royal Navy did protect the sea routes and keep them open so that ships from all countries could sail and trade. And they knew that the fleet was important. As that bit of propaganda says, one king, one flag, one fleet, one empire. That's what held it all together. It was at that time the most powerful navy easily in the world. Now for glory, right? The grandeur of empire. It's easy to think about bragging rights as kind of petty things that really don't matter. But the bragging rights of empire were important not just to your average citizen, although they were very important to average citizens. If you're a poor person living in East London, you can still brag that you live in the most powerful city, in the most powerful country in the entire world. And at that point, you might just say, well, so empire is kind of like an opiate of the people, too, right? Some poor person in East London who might otherwise be prone to revolution and is somehow proud of being a very poor person in a very powerful country. Maybe so. But the bragging rights weren't just about telling the people why empire was good. Leaders also genuinely cared about it. As we've said before, the British very often like to boast that they had the world's biggest empire ever. It was so big that there was no time when the sun wasn't shining on some piece of territory that was part of the British Empire. For something more specific, look at something that Robert Godey or Gowdy has written about Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Kaiser is the German word that roughly means, well, it doesn't roughly mean Caesar. I think it does pretty literally mean Caesar, but it's something that's more like an emperor, uh, not just a king. So Kaiser Wilhelm II, we should talk a little bit about his country. Before 1871, there is no Germany. There are lots of German states, there are German principalities, there are free cities, there are places controlled by parts of the Roman Catholic Church, for example, but there is no Germany. After 1871, there is a Germany, and Kaiser is the ruler of the whole thing. Because Germany does not exist until 1871, they miss out on a lot of this imperialism. They do get into it, but they're late to the game. They want to find what they refer to as their place in the sun. And so when they're negotiating for the border of what will become German East Africa, which on the map here is going to be focused on this area that's now Tanzania. I realize it's very hard for you to see. I also don't want you to get too terribly concerned about finding it on the map just now. So as Gowdy writes, the border did a weird zigzag around Mount Kilimanjaro, allotting Africa's tallest peak to the Kaiser. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, the Queen of the United Kingdom, had the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas and any other number of big mountains. The Kaiser had none and wanted a big mountain of his own. If that sounds childish, it might be, but these bragging rights mattered. The Kaiser didn't have any of these great tall mountains. Germany kind of has mountains, but nothing like what we would think of in the United States with our Rocky Mountains, and certainly nothing like the Himalayas. And the Kaiser wanted to make sure that German African colonies could have something special to brag about, and that was Mount Kilimanjaro. It mattered. Also, and we'll come back to this later, but Queen Victoria really was the Kaiser's grandmother. She will die. Her son will take over. Her son is the Kaiser's cousin, first cousin, of course, and the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas, is also a cousin. And so World War I, when we get to it, is in a lot of ways a war between cousins. The scramble for empire, especially between Germany and Britain, was also a rivalry of families. So what this all boils down to is that empire was a status symbol. It was a Cadillac Escalade, a house with a three-car garage. Whatever your choice of status symbol is, this was the status symbol for major powers during Globalization 1.0. I don't know, do people still want Escalades? Are Escalades still a thing? I mean, I know they still make them, but is that what people still want? Is that the cool thing to roll around in? Maybe. I don't know. It looks like a big box. People come here from other countries and they see like Tahoes and Suburbans and Escalades, and they just imagine that they were designed by children using building blocks. Okay, I'm really cheap, so I want something that gets good gas mileage and has tires that don't cost a fortune to replace. And an Escalade does not check either of those boxes for me. Okay, so they are still a thing. All right. I want to give you some visuals about this as a status symbol. This was a postage stamp for, of course, as you can see, Canada, right, when it was still part of the British Empire. They were proud, at least the people who picked the postage stamps were proud. They put Canada and the Americas here in the center of the British Empire, and they note in Christmas 1898 that there has never been a bigger empire. School children, of course, we can't have a day of presentation without screen blackout. This is why I keep having to dredge up recordings from last year.